Welcome to Ananke's Women in Literature Festival 2023. This is our third edition, and today we're deeply honored to have here with us an esteemed scholar, Farahnaz Ispahani. Farahnaz Ispahani has been a leading voice for women and religious minorities in Pakistan for the past 25 years, first as a journalist, then as a member of Pakistan's National Assembly, and most recently as a scholar based in the United States. Farahnaz is the author, editor of Politics of Hate, Religious Majoritarianism in South Asia, which was published in early 2023 by HarperCollins India. And she's also the author of Purifying the Land of the Pure, A History of Pakistan's Religious Minorities, published in 2017 by OUP in the United States. Farahnaz Saiba, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time out to join us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today.
Not at all. So our session today is on South Asia and the politics of hate. Now, Farahnaz Saiba, according to the World Economic Forum, about 70% of the new value created in the economy in the next 10 years will be based on economic activity based on digital enablement. While the world moves forward, we see South Asia regress into the abyss of hatred based on politics fueled by elements that have always and historically existed, but are now exploited to create further fragmentation across the region. With this conversation, we hope to explore these elements with you, which have come to form the politics of hate and what can be done to go beyond for a healthier future. Over to you, Sabin.
Thank you so much, Mehr, for that wonderful summary of this session. Farahnaz Saiba, what recommendations can be made to enable inclusive participation in the democratic process to eradicate exclusion of communities or ensure equal participation?
Thank you, Mehr, and thank you, Sabin. First of all, I think we must remember that hate is learned behavior. People do not hate the other instinctively. People are taught to hate. It is a process of otherization, us versus them, that creates fear, anxiety, and eventually hate. Fear of the other is magnified by society, by culture, and by people invoking differences. The politics of hate is the process of generating mass fear. Our culture, our religion, our way of life is threatened by them. Hate leads to exclusion. Democratic freedoms can be easily abused by some to acquire power through hate. Just make enough people fearful of a minority to get votes, and you can have a working majority. The way I feel to combat exclusion is by creating legal and social mechanisms against it. Stop letting people advocate exclusivity in the name of freedom of speech. Hate speech needs to be identified in time and stopped. Above all, inclusivity needs to be part of one's education. People need to understand the concept of equal citizenship. No ifs and buts should be allowed. Conspiracy theories are another instrument of hate. Such and such communities will dominate us if we do not discriminate against them. So and so are always doing this. You don't know them, but I understand what they're all about. These are often the preface of prejudice. Prejudice breeds hate, and hate leads to exclusivity.
You raise an interesting point, two words that caught my attention: hate speech, and two terms, hate speech and freedom of expression. So how do we manage freedom of expression when it comes to hate speech? Because for some it would be hate speech, but for others it's freedom of expression. It's all about perspective.
Sabine, in fact, I'm extremely glad you picked up on that, because we have seen very often governments around the world use hate speech laws, blasphemy laws, not really to protect people and their rights to speech, but to control what people do speak. So yes, I feel these laws are important, but they have to be extremely sensitive in how they go about creating these. In some societies, they don't agree with laws controlling freedom of speech at all. In some countries, there are laws where freedom of speech is allowed, but any sort of call toward violence from that free speech is not allowed. So, today we're looking at, for example, in America, where free speech has been such a huge part of the Constitution and the life in society, but that freedom of speech used by former President Trump has brought out into the open a lot of hate that existed in the society. And so today you see a society that is increasingly hateful and increasingly fragmented.
Again, you bring up Trump, and it's interesting how he has incited fear as well, hatred as well, the way he spoke. But on the flip side, he was banned from Twitter. So that was an organization taking away his right as well, as far as freedom of expression is concerned. So again, as a leader of, the first world, quote unquote, is it, what kind of responsibility should a leader have, and these organizations, because, they're all part of the democratic process?
We can't do anything about Elon Musk. He owns Twitter, right? He is a private individual.
He brought him back, by the way. He's brought Trump back. Yeah.
But private individuals, we can't do much about. I mean, we can lobby them, embarrass them, do many things as public citizens. But governments in free societies are not supposed to control private entities. So that's a whole different, I would say, topic, because I really work more on what the role is of governments, of nations, and of people directly engaged in the political process. But yes, people like Elon Musk are extremely problematic because in a way, they control so much an area of free speech, which now they're picking and choosing who they want to have that free speech.
What role does trust play in achieving deeper engagement to remove misconceptions and misunderstandings in order to create an environment which is strong for healthy and safe inclusion?
Sabin, trust is critical. Francis Fukuyama lays out in his book, Trust, how high trust societies are more productive. Lack of trust, a culture of suspicion, saps a society's energies. You're too busy suspecting others and their motives to be productive. Conspiracy theories lead to extremely negative obsessions. Most prejudices, I would feel most prejudices are based on misconceptions and misunderstandings. Often the misunderstanding reflects anxieties about one's place in the world or the place of one's community or group or country. So it is always easy for a leader to tell people that they're great, but someone else is holding them back. If they only hate that someone and fight or suppress them, they can be great. So we are seeing this in South Asia unleashed today. Different degrees in different countries in South Asia, but you are seeing this role of populist leaders and how they are using the politics of hate to gather people around them and to, in some ways, unleash violence. So the politics of hate are often about creating misconceptions, misunderstandings, and deliberately stoking mass hysteria and mass fear.
So you talk about politics of hate and how populist leaders, again, have a huge following. Their followers trust them. So how is that narrative created?
It's created exactly as, I had said, I think, towards the beginning of this interview. In a way, it's creating us and the other. It's creating this feeling, which is something quite interesting. And Hitler did this in Germany, where even though the Christians were the majority, and the Germanic people were the majority, he convinced them that Jewish Germans, gay Germans, gypsy Germans, anyone who was not part actually of the majority was being undermined by these minorities. And it is such an interesting thing to make a huge majority feel unsafe in Pakistan. How can Ahmadi Muslims, how can they possibly create any issues for the majority, Sunni or Shia communities? It's impossible. So this is where, we are right now. And I would say it everywhere. Populist leaders creating fear on the part of the majorities, making them fear those minorities, and from the fear leading to hate, whether it's hate speech, whether it's hate in the form of violence.
And again, talking about hate, how has COVID, the pandemic, and the different disasters that are happening, if we talk about Pakistan, the recent floods, how does this all, pan out as far as the politics of hate is concerned, vis-a-vis, marginalized voices across the region?
Well, for one thing, I think during COVID, specifically, I think people were home more, people were online more, and they were isolated, people were depressed, and people were looking for answers. And in India, you saw this whole, whether it was love jihad or whether it was, accusing the Tablighi Jamaat people who had come to Delhi of spreading the pandemic, or this is what my whole thesis is really, blaming a massive outbreak of a health emergency onto a minority and stoking up those fears and hatred. So in Pakistan, I would say the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely. We did a special edition called Faces of Resilience, and we basically focused on the tide of intolerance, during the COVID time. And you mentioned, India. In Pakistan as well, different communities, Christian nurses were, they were singled out, and, they were made to work, not even nurses, people like janitors, and because they belong to a, minority community, they were forced to work without proper, uniform, PPEs, inside the COVID wards, then there's another aspect where Shia pilgrims came from Iran, and they also, were blamed for the, rapid rise of COVID cases. So, and it's not just one community or the other, this happened across the board as far as marginalized communities is concerned. So
I absolutely agree. And in fact, not these floods, the last floods that took place when I was a member of parliament, I remember, because I come from the Sindh province in Pakistan, I visited a lot of villages and we did work on the ground. And literally, when provisions would come from the state government or the federal government, they would go to the majority communities first.
Yeah.
And then food would go to the minority communities. And within the minority communities, it was heartbreaking to see, but even among the Hindu communities, for example, the Brahmin communities, the upper class communities, would not eat with the lower class, members of their own faith. So, it is so complicated how deep hate can be. And you'd mentioned Iran. They never said in the spin, the conspiracy theory, that Iranians have brought COVID. It was Shias have brought COVID, you see? So this religion and hate, I would say, is probably the most terrifying part. And it also includes that conspiracy theory that I had mentioned earlier.
And coming to what you just said about religion, how the powers that be, or anyone in a powerful position, how they position religion as far as the politics of hate is concerned, and playing on people's fear, vis-a-vis religion. That is really, how would you respond to that?
Well, I will talk about Pakistan because I have worked on it the most. When you see hatred coming from the top, for example, let's just not even start with the Second Amendment to the Constitution, but for example, the anti-Ahmadi legislation, the blasphemy laws, etc. It starts from the top. All of these in India, like the CAA law and all of that, all these start at the top. But today what you see policemen going to Rabwa and to Ahmadi graveyards and breaking gravestones that have any Quranic inscription. So the point is, it starts at the top, it goes to the bottom, and then the mob, people who have been, the curriculum, for example, Sabin is a huge part of it.
Yes.
Curriculums in Pakistan for a very long time, but in India today, right? Curriculums are removing anything that shows that our countries are made up of many peoples, of many communities, of many faiths. All the inclusive language, all the inclusive history has been removed. And you see it in Pakistani textbooks for state schools. And now in India, they are talking about removing, for example, all the, about the Mughals. And there's much more to it, which I won't go into now because of time. But so basically, I would say on the part of the state, everything starts on the part of the state, is what I have seen in South Asia and what I have also seen in the West, the positives and the negatives, about whether you implement policies to help and protect minorities, give them equal citizenship. You know, why even the fact that we're having to use this majority minority language is so wrong. Everyone born in a country is an equal citizen, and that is where we need to go.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, on the part of the state, what are the considerations when implementing policies, and how can they ensure the safe inclusion of minorities and marginalized communities?
Well, as I said before, the state must protect minorities, promote tolerance, and check extremism. If the state, if at the top level this is not done, we will end up where we are today, and it has to be checked. And only at this state can the government, for example, and state institutions do this. Look around us and you will find that wherever the state is doing its duty, the smallest minorities feel safer and more included. There's sectarian and ethnic violence all over the world, right? Majority mobs attack minorities with impunity when they know the machinery of state will not punish them for their actions, or the punishment will be minimized even if they are apprehended. So basically, the state's first obligation, Sabin, I would say, the state's first obligation is to protect its citizens' life and property, whether they're from the majority or minority community. You know, whether we were talking about free speech, whether it's journalists, whether it's human rights activists, whether it's digital rights activists, whether they're faith minority communities, ethnic minority communities, or majorities, all citizens' life and property is the state's first obligation to protect. And the problem we have seen is that when all your votes come from only one community, you write off the others, right? So you look the other way when your voters attack marginalized people whose votes you feel you do not need. It's also the state's duty to teach a neutral version of history in schools, not use education as a way of demonizing one community or another. History shows us examples, right, where the state engaged in organized persecution of minorities. I mentioned Germany and occupied territories in Europe during the Holocaust, but there have been many other recent cases where the state has encouraged ethnic cleansing or organized the marginalization of minorities in South Asia and around the world. So basically, the state has to be involved.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it has to be a trickle-down effect. And where, talking about education, we are then, the establishment or the government or the state, let's not say government, but the state is basically reinforcing, belief systems existing for a long time. So my last question is citizen engagement with the state, with different voices from the community. Can that impact and trigger change, systemic change?
Basically, every effort that brings economic empowerment and social empowerment for marginalized communities must be welcomed. And I think literacy initiatives, digitization of artisans, such initiatives are all positive. And, keeping voices alive and fighting to keep space alive for citizen activists, for citizen journalists, for citizens is crucial, because that is what, in a way, the rest of the world can see. And so it is helpful. All of that is helpful. But, to be frank, a country the size of Pakistan with 220 million people needs a lot more than just that. So you need the state, you need international organizations, you need citizens and all of their efforts. So all of it is crucial. No one thing will work without other efforts in alignment.
Thank you so much, Farahnaz Ispahani, for this short. I wish we could go on because truly this is so insightful. But thank you so much for coming on board and talking about these very important issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabin, and thank you for having me on this very important Lit Fest. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and honor.